Nunavut is enormous, 2 million square kilometers of Arctic Canada, one territory, about 40,000 people, and almost none of them live anywhere near this story. Off the southwest coast of King William Island, 2 Royal Navy ships have been sitting on the seafloor since 1848. For the last decade, Parks Canada divers have been quietly taking them apart, room by room. There's a fishing rod in a dead man's cabin, a chest full of pistols nobody can explain, a jawbone with cut marks on it that finally got a name attached, and when it did, it rewrote what historians thought they knew about who survived, for how long, and at what cost. Stick around for that one. It's number 1 on this list, and it's the reason this case is still being argued over. Welcome to the channel where we dig into Canada's strangest, best documented mysteries. If you haven't subscribed, do it now. We post stories like this every week. Today we're counting down 10 things scientists actually found inside the Franklin expedition wrecks. Number 10. The bell, the sound that stopped in 1848. For most of September 2014, divers had been working a wreck in Wilmot and Crampton Bay, off the Adelaide Peninsula, without being completely certain which ship they'd actually found. Then one of them found the bell. Marc-André Bernier, then chief of Parks Canada's underwater archaeology team, was listening over an intercom from the boat above when the words came through, "I found the bell. I found the bell." It had fallen from its belfry and was resting on the deck. No ship's name stamped on it, but the Royal Navy's broad arrow mark was there, and so was a date cast into the brass, 1845, the year the expedition sailed. Recovering artifacts wasn't even the plan that season. 2014 was about locating the wreck, not raising objects from it. The bell was the one exception, because a bell carrying the exact year an expedition began isn't a rope or a rock, it's an identity. Parks Canada spent about a month afterward confirming it really was Erebus, matching the ship's original construction plans against the measured dimensions of the hull. The search that got them there wasn't run on sonar, it was run on memory. Louis Kamukak, an Inuit historian from Juve Haven, spent more than 30 years collecting the stories the Netzilik had passed down about a wooden ship and the men who died leaving it. He shared that oral history with Parks Canada in 2008. 6 years later, the wreck turned up almost exactly where those stories had always placed it. The bell was sealed in a water-filled glass container and unveiled in Ottawa that November by the country's environment minister. It would have been struck every half hour, day and night, for as long as there were men aboard to strike it. Divers around it that first season also logged pulley blocks, coiled rope, and 2 brass cannons still sitting nearby. The bell and a cannon were later among a small sample handed over to the United Kingdom, which owned the wrecks until formally gifting them to Canada in 2018. Starting in 2024, Parks Canada began transferring that sample to the National Museum of the Royal Navy. Selected pieces from Erebus are also on display at the Natalik Heritage Center in Go Haven, which opened a new exhibition in 2025. A ship goes silent the moment its crew deserts it. This one kept its exact date of birth legible for 166 years underwater, waiting for someone to come back and read it. Number 9. The fishing rod, the thermometer, and the fossils nobody has named yet. The Franklin expedition wasn't only a race for the Northwest Passage. It was also supposed to be a science mission, and the officers packed accordingly. In a cabin believed to belong to 2nd Lieutenant Henry Dundas Levescant, Parks Canada divers found a parallel rule: an intact thermometer, a leather book cover, and a fishing rod complete with its brass reel. Next door, in the cabin believed to be 3rd Lieutenant James Fairholmes, they found something stranger: a small, private collection of fossils. Unidentified, uncatalogued, sitting in a drawer since at least 1845, alongside a fossil recovered from the same cabin in an earlier season that may be a genuine natural history specimen, something Fairholme picked up himself, somewhere along the way. None of this helped anyone survive. That's what makes it worth mentioning. A fishing rod and a rock collection are not expedition-critical gear. They're what a bored, curious young officer keeps around during an Arctic winter that drags on months longer than anyone planned. The 2023 season alone ran 68 dives over 12 days just to reach this layer of the ship. Divers also recovered a sextant from the same general area, one that vanished under drifting silt for years before turning up again barely a foot from where it was first spotted. Everything from this excavation eventually goes to Ottawa, with a rotating selection returned to the Natalik Heritage Center in Gayjoa Haven. Thousands of artifacts are still down there, untouched. Somewhere on the floor of a doomed ship, a junior officer's fossil collection is still waiting for someone to figure out what it actually is. Number 8. The fingerprint in the sealing wax. By 2019, storms and moving ice had already stripped much of the upper deck of Erebus bare, so that year's dive team gambled on the officers' quarters below, betting that enclosed drawers and fitted cabinets might have kept their contents sealed away from the sea. The bet paid off. That single season produced more than 350 artifacts, described by Parks Canada as the most successful excavation at the site to that point. Divers worked in hot water suits, with hyperbaric chambers staged on the support barge overhead, in water that rarely climbs above freezing. Almost all of it came out of one room, the pantry belonging to the captain's steward. Plates stacked 13 high in places, large serving dishes, plate warmers and strainers, an accordion, a toothbrush that came up with its bristles perfectly intact, a cedar wood pencil case, still holding its lead and slate pencils, a glass decanter, likely for brandy or port, from the officer's mess nearby, and a stick of sealing wax, the kind used to close letters, with a fingerprint pressed into it. In that same small room, archaeologists found a lead stamp bearing a name, Ed Hoare. Edmund Hoare, from Portsea, Hampshire, was the captain's steward. He was 23 years old when Erebus sailed in 1845. Here's the detail worth sitting with. 2 separate objects, in a room barely bigger than a closet, both saying the same thing in different ways. His name pressed into lead, his fingerprint pressed into wax. Nobody set out to preserve either one. Cold water, total darkness, and oxygen-starved sediment did that by accident. The pantry is sealed again now, back under the sea, closed to the public along with the rest of the wreck. The wax and the stamp both made the trip to conservation labs in Ottawa. A 23-year-old steward left 2 different kinds of proof that he was there. Neither one was supposed to outlast him by 170 years. Number 7. 20 pistols in one sailor's chest. A sea chest is personal property. It's where an ordinary seaman kept his own belongings, clothes, tools, whatever little he owned. It is not supposed to be an arsenal. In the forecastle of Erebus, where the regular crew lived and slept, Parks Canada began excavating a single chest during the 2023 season and found pistols. Not 1 or 2, more than 20 of them, alongside military gear, footwear, medicinal bottles, and coins. Only a small selection was actually brought to the surface that year. The rest was documented in place and left where it lay. By 2024, the team had raised 2 of those pistols, plus a soldering iron, gloves, socks, a medicinal bottle, and rolls of straight-edge shaving razors, all from the same box. Nobody has published an explanation for any of it. One reading is mundane. The chest got repurposed for bulk storage once the crew started consolidating gear for an escape attempt. Another reading is less comfortable. Weapons were being redistributed among the men during the ship's final, desperate winter. Parks Canada hasn't said which, and the excavation has been carried out slowly, layer by layer, across at least 2 full seasons, as though the archaeologists themselves aren't in a hurry to guess. A hammock tag, stamped with a number, is still fixed to a beam nearby, one man's designated sleeping spot, in a room now being emptied drawer by drawer, more than 170 years later. Out in the surrounding debris field, that same 2024 season turned up one of the ship's spare propellers, first logged on the seabed back in 2015, and an ice anchor. Most of the chest's contents are still exactly where they were found. In 2025, Parks Canada shifted from active excavation to a monitoring program across both wreck sites, so this particular box may sit half open for a long while yet. 20 guns and a set of razors packed together in a dead man's chest on a ship where every single person eventually died. Parks Canada has never said why. Maybe that's the honest answer. Number 6. The wreck is falling apart faster than they can dig it. Erebus and Terror are sister ships, but they ended up in almost opposite situations on the sea floor. Terror sits upright in 21 to 24 meters of water, in a deep, sheltered bay, buried under sediment that sealed her interior for a century and a half. Erebus sits in just 11 meters of open water off the Adelaide Peninsula, shallow enough that ordinary storm swell reaches all the way down to her hull. For most of the last 170 years, that didn't matter, because the sea around her was frozen over for most of the year. It matters now. As Arctic ice cover declines, the open water season stretches longer, and the storm window gets wider with it. Parks Canada's own fieldwork in 2022 confirmed physical changes to the wreck, most likely caused by wave action from windstorms. A section of the upper deck has already collapsed, blocking access to compartments beneath it. Here's the wild part. The wreck is actually rearranging its own contents while it falls apart. An officer's sextant, spotted on one of the very first dives into the ship, vanished under shifting silt and timber for years. When the team finally relocated it, the sextant had moved about 30 centimeters from where it started. Not stolen, not lost, just shuffled by the same slow currents that are quietly taking the whole ship apart. Then Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault once called these two wrecks among the best-preserved wooden shipwrecks in the world. That's accurate. It's also a description with an expiry date. Parks Canada has deployed current measuring instruments at both sites to track exactly how fast the water is working, and in 2025 shifted from active excavation to ongoing monitoring, watching the site now rather than racing it. The Natalik Heritage Society's Wrecks Guardian program, run out of Joa Haven, helps keep an eye on both wrecks between research seasons. Erebus survived a century and a half locked in ice without anyone laying a hand on her. Now that the ice is retreating, she may not survive the years it takes to finish reading her. If you're finding this as strange as we did putting it together, drop a thumbs up. It actually helps more people find these stories. Tell us in the comments, which find unsettles you more, the pistols or the fossils? We've covered the objects so far. The next 4 are about the men who owned them, and it gets heavier from here. Number 5. The hairbrush that refused to talk. By 2019, the researchers working these wrecks had already built something new, a DNA database drawn from living descendants of the expedition's crew. So when divers pulled a wooden hairbrush out of a fitted cabinet that same season, with actual human hair still caught in its bristles, it looked like the shortcut everyone had been waiting for. Real tissue, from inside the ship itself, that might finally put a name to one more anonymous man. The brush is a small, well-made object, a satinwood stock, a pear-shaped head, hog hair bristles held in with copper wire, exactly the kind of grooming kit a mid-19th century gentleman would have carried. Hairbrushes like it turn up occasionally on Victorian-era shipwrecks. It's rare for one to still have anything organic attached. This one had 20 scalp hairs and 1 facial hair, tangled in the bristles after 170 years on the Arctic seafloor. Then, the results came back. Iron oxide from the corroding wreck had worked its way into the hair shafts. Biological decay had done the rest. When researchers finally ran the full elemental analysis in 2023, they could describe the hair's color, its diameter, its chemistry, in exact detail, and confirm that no viable DNA had survived. No match, no name. They can't even say for certain whether every strand came from the same man. It's an odd kind of near miss. This same research group has now put names to 6 different Franklin sailors, working entirely from bone. This was the one sample that came from inside the ship, from an actual grooming tool a man used on his own head, and it's the one that gave up nothing at all. The brush and its hairs now sit in Parks Canada's collection, co-owned with the Inuit Heritage Trust, filed permanently as a negative result. Somewhere on that ship, a man brushed his hair before turning in for the night, never imagining that act would be the one thing about him that survived, and that it still wouldn't be enough to say his name. Number 4. Somebody closed this book. A feather quill pen, tucked into the fold of an embossed leather cover, exactly the way you'd leave a notebook on a nightstand before turning in for the night. That's how divers found it in 2022, inside the same pantry that had already produced a steward's fingerprint and his lead name stamp. Ryan Harris, the Parks Canada archaeologist, who was part of the original 2014 team that found the wreck, rated it among the best finds of his career. It matters more than almost anything else recovered from either ship, and the reason is simple. The Franklin expedition left behind almost no writing at all. One note, folded into a cairn near Victory Point. A handful of fragments in a dead man's pocketbook. That is essentially the entire surviving written record of 3 years and 105 men. Everything historians think they know about those final winters is reconstruction, built from bone and educated guesswork. So when this folio came up, leather cover, pages inside, quill still tucked in place, it wasn't logged as one artifact among the 275 recovered that season. It was treated as a test case. If pages that spent 170 years in Arctic seawater can survive conservation and actually be read, then every sealed drawer, still sitting inside Terror's captain's cabin, becomes one of the most important unopened objects in Canadian archaeology. The same 2022 season also produced a pair of epaulets and a cased pistol from a nearby cabin, while, just 2 doors down, another cabin turned up almost completely empty, as if its contents had been deliberately taken. Canadian historian Ken McGugan put the stakes plainly. Even confirming the pages can be deciphered at all would count as a genuine win, regardless of what they turn out to say. The folio has been sitting in a conservation lab in Ottawa since 2022. Nobody has announced that a single word of it has been read yet. It might be a food inventory. It might be something else entirely. Until someone says otherwise, it's simply a closed book, in a drawer, in a city very far from the one it was written in. Number 3. The man in the wrong uniform, alone. In 1859, a search party led by Francis Leopold McClintock found a body on the southern shore of King William Island. In the dead man's pocket was a leather pocketbook of papers, including a seaman's certificate bearing the name Harry Pegler, captain of the foretop aboard HMS Terror. Straightforward enough, except the clothing on the body didn't match. Pegler was a topman, a rigging specialist, a petty officer. The clothes belonged to a steward. That contradiction sat unresolved for 166 years. For most of that time, the scholarly consensus quietly moved the body away from Pegler and toward 2 other candidates, Thomas Armitage or William Gibson, both stewards who'd served alongside Pegler on earlier ships and might plausibly have been carrying his papers for him. It was a tidy solution. It also turned out to be wrong. In 2026, researchers ran DNA from the skeleton against descendants of 6 of the 8 stewards who could have been the body. None matched. They ran it against a descendant of Harry Pegler himself. It matched, with a genetic distance of 0. The man in the wrong clothes had been exactly who his papers said he was, the entire time. He'd also died alone. His remains were found roughly 130 kilometers from Erebus Bay, where 3 other sailors identified in the same 2026 study died together. Everyone else on this list who has been named so far died in a group. Pegler walked, or was carried, further than any of them, and there was no one left with him when he stopped. The papers found in his pocket are almost the only first-hand writing that survives from this entire expedition. They're known as the Pegler Papers, and they include a certificate, some poetry, and what look like descriptions of events from the crew's final months. Here's the detail that stops people cold. Parts of them are written backwards, mirror reversed, spelled out phonetically, like a private code. After 166 years, nobody has reliably worked out what most of it says. Why write backwards? Nobody knows for certain, though some researchers have suggested it was a simple parlor trick, a way of keeping certain lines private from anyone glancing over his shoulder. On a ship with no privacy at all, that's not an unreasonable guess. The papers survive in institutional collections and are still being studied. The clothing discrepancy that fooled 2 centuries of historians has never been explained. A man carried his own name in his pocket for 166 years, and it took a DNA lab to believe him. Number 2. The one door they haven't opened. Terror sits upright in Terror Bay, off the southwest coast of King William Island, in 21 to 24 meters of water, deep enough, sheltered enough, that when Parks Canada finally sent a remotely operated vehicle inside her in August 2019, it didn't find wreckage, it found rooms. All three of her masts are still standing on the seabed, a level of intactness almost never seen on a wreck this old. Over 7 days, the team drove that ROV through 20 separate cabins and compartments, capturing clear footage of more than 90% of the lower deck. Conditions this good, after years of poor visibility in 2016 and 2017, and ice interference the year before that. In the presumed officer's mess pantry, shelves still held plates and glass bottles, tumblers and stemware. Forward, in the crew's own quarters, rows of shelves held plates, bowls, and glasses, intact, unbroken, sitting exactly where they'd been left. The best preserved room on the entire deck is the captain's own cabin. Sediment had poured in through the stern gallery windows over a century and a half, burying the floor under half a meter of silt in places, protecting, rather than destroying, whatever sits beneath it. What the cameras made out, the captain's desk, map cabinets, their drawers closed, boxes that likely hold scientific instruments, a complete surveyor's tripod, a pair of thermometers. That desk belonged to Francis Crozier, who took command of the entire expedition after Franklin died, and who led 105 men off these ships and out onto the ice in April of 1848. Parks Canada's own account of the dive states plainly that those sealed drawers almost certainly hold information about the expedition, and that finding actual written documents inside is not just possible, it's likely. And then there's the door. On the entire lower deck of HMS Terror, exactly one space remains completely inaccessible: the captain's sleeping quarters, behind the only closed door on that level. Nobody has opened it. Nobody has looked inside. Water sits at or below 0 degrees down there, with no natural light for 170 years. Senior Parks Canada archaeologist Ryan Harris has described the whole ship as a largely sealed environment, one that could preserve organic material, written documents, charts, in a condition almost nobody gets to see on a wreck this old. The team returned to Terror in 2024 for the first time since that 2019 dive, but the work that year focused on surface mapping and a 3D model of the upper deck, not on going back inside. In 2025, Parks Canada shifted from active excavation to ongoing monitoring across both sites. The door is still closed. It has been closed since 1848, and right now, there's no plan to open it. Number 1. The jawbone of the man who wrote the note. Picture a gravel beach on the southwest shore of King William Island. Nothing marks it from a distance except a low stone cairn, built in 2014, sitting almost level with the shingle around it. No trees anywhere, no structures, no birds, most of the year. Just wind moving steadily over loose rock, and beneath a section of that beach, bones that have been lying there since 1848. 451 of them, from at least 13 men, first excavated in 1993. For decades, that was the entire story. A pile of anonymous bone, some of it carrying cut marks nobody wanted to explain out loud. Inuit accounts collected in the 1850s had already described starving sailors resorting to eating one another. Victorian Britain rejected that testimony outright. Charles Dickens attacked it in print. The Royal Navy's dead were supposed to stay clean, even in death, even in total failure. The bones disagreed. From the 1980s onward, researchers working these sites recorded cut marks on fragment after fragment. Bioarchaeologist Anne Keenlyside, who died in 2022, documented much of it in detail. But cut-marked bone is anonymous. It proves someone was eaten. It doesn't say who, or when, or whether officers were spared the way rank was supposed to spare them from almost everything else. That changed in September 2024. Researchers from the University of Waterloo and Lakehead University extracted DNA from a molar attached to one of those 451 bones and compared it against samples from 25 living descendants of the expedition's crew. One matched a second cousin, 5 times removed, sharing a great-grandfather with the man whose jaw this was. James Fitzjames, captain of HMS Erebus, after Franklin died in June of 1847. And that jawbone has cut marks on it. Fitzjames is the officer who co-wrote the note left in the cairn at Victory Point, the single most important surviving document from this entire expedition, the one that told the world Franklin was dead and both ships had been deserted. He isn't an anonymous sailor. He has a face, a daguerreotype taken weeks before departure in 1845, a name on the official record. And his own jaw is one of 4 sets of remains at that site showing evidence of cannibalism. Douglas Stenton, who led the identification, put it plainly: Fitzjames died while some of his men were still alive, and that neither rank nor status decided who survived those final weeks and who didn't. In May 2026, the same research team named 4 more of Franklin's men, 3 from Erebus, 1 from Terror, bringing the total identified to 6 out of 105. None of those 4 showed any evidence of cannibalism. Fitzjames still does. 99 of the 105 men who walked off these ships in April 1848 remain unidentified. Their bones are still out there, on beaches very much like this one, waiting for a living relative somewhere in the world to send in a sample nobody has thought to ask for yet. The man who told the world how the expedition ended became, in the end, part of how it ended too. Nunavut keeps a very quiet, very cold archive, and these 2 ships are only the part of it we've started reading. My favorite entry here is the closed door on Terror, an entire room, sealed since 1848, waiting on a monitoring plan instead of a diver. Tell us in the comments which one got you, or which discovery we missed. If forgotten Canadian history like this is your thing, subscribe. We're doing this every week.